Hallelujah. Let Lord Jesus Christ shine forth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us. Welcome to live stream with DCCI Ministries. And I have privilege to have Titans TV, Kalam from Titans TV, and Jay will turn up one point into that messy office. So he will come. He will come. Kalam, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. It's actually baking over here in London. I'm enjoying the weather, and I'm about to enjoy this presentation.
I can feel you are sweaty on the head.
Yeah, there's a lot of light just bathing my forehead.
Would you be kind enough and then just tell us a little bit about who you are, and then I'll kind of introduce the topic. Hopefully by then Jay will turn up from his water break.
Definitely. So, I think I'm mostly known for Titans TV. So I started my channel, I believe it's about 12 or 13 years ago, interviewing a lot of interesting people inside of the conscious community, people who are interested in history, culture, religion, philosophy. And I've had some great names come onto the channel and bless the channel. Then I expanded out over into Speaker's Corner, where I got to meet yourself, Jay Smith, and the rest of the team. Oh, Beth. I don't even know where Beth is, but Beth was there back in the day as well.
Yeah.
We had some very interesting figures, Godwin as well. And I started to record at Speaker's Corner, and I was recording everybody from the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the atheists, political debates, everything. So my channel was a bit unique because I was all-encompassing. I had allowed everybody to just come onto the channel to actually have their say. And I think we kind of started a movement of some sort as Speaker's Corner, which caused more individuals to come in over and actually bring cameras and start recording all the great conversations that were taking place. But myself, I'm mainly interested in, my main interest, I would say, is in African history and how it actually intersects with religion as well. So, you know, I've had a good time actually having conversations with a lot of people from various backgrounds and just learning some more. I was actually a fanboy when I realized that Jay Smith was a person that I used to watch on YouTube. Okay, I was watching Jay Smith on YouTube. I didn't even realize it was Jay Smith when I actually went to Speaker's Corner. I was like, this voice sounds very familiar. And then one time I invited him to YouTube Studios. This is years ago, to do an interview there. And it only clicked in my head that this person that I was watching on the origins of Islam like 10 years, more than 10 years ago, was the Jay Smith. Back then, he didn't have a beard. If you look at the old videos, a younger Jay Smith, there's no beard. And then when I saw him at Speaker's Corner, I didn't put two and two together until I actually had a conversation with him. And I was like, it's Jay Smith. And then it all dawned on me.
Well, it was old days. Jay got older and he now drinks milk and eats banana before the live streams. So, how are you doing, Jay?
Good. All right. Hi, Kalam. After many years, that was been about 20 years ago when I've had a beard for 20 years. So we're going back in ancient history now. I think I probably knew you before I knew Hatun.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was at the corner by the time I came.
Yeah.
Sure, we go everywhere.
I've been at the corner since 1992, so I'm ancient history. I think I'm the oldest long ongoing. I was there for 25 years, so that's a long time. And as you can see, it made me go gray.
That's okay. That's okay. Sign of wisdom. Okay, so the plan is today is I'm gonna hand over mic to Kalam. He's gonna make a case regarding who is real Muhammad, if I understood correctly. I really don't know. He's not a Christian. He's not a Muslim. I really don't know why he's even interested in this topic besides searching for trouble. And then after he finishes his presentation, there will be kind of conversation between him and Jay Smith. So that's kind of our plan. I am assuming his presentation will take over an hour. And meantime, those of you in the chat, it's good to have you. So bring up your questions and your comments. You are okay to take questions, Kalam?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So bring up your questions, talk the CCI ministries, and then towards end, I'll kind of start them and then I'll pass them on. Hopefully we will get some answers. And by end of the live stream, I am assuming we will be all more confused about the Prophet of Islam or real Muhammad. So are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Let's share the screen and go from there.
Okay. So today's presentation is the historical Muhammad, rediscovering the Abyssinian origins of Islam. I know it's going to sound very controversial to a lot of people, but it shouldn't be. I got interested in this topic actually because I realized there was so much mention of Abyssinia from the Islamic paradigm. There was talks about Muhammad, his followers migrating to Ethiopia or Abyssinia. We have records of him saying, don't fight the Abyssinians. He conquered everywhere else, the Byzantines, the Persians, but never supposedly conquering the Abyssinians. Irfan Shahid has written a nice paper where he talks about the only language outside of Arabic that we know that Muhammad spoke was the Ge'ez or the Ethiopic language. So, it was very interesting to me. I thought, okay, let me just delve in a little bit deeper and find out more about the Abyssinian origins of Islam, since everybody else is doing the Byzantine origins of Islam or the Sassanid influences and origins of Islam. I thought, yeah, let me actually jump into this and see what did the Abyssinians have and what was the connection between them and Islam. So let's start the presentation. So my question to your audience is this: what does Muhammad and Santa Claus have in common? Well, apart from them both being legendary figures that flew into heaven with mystical beasts, they were both birthed out of historical figures. Santa Claus was birthed out of the 4th century Christian bishop from Byzantine Empire called Saint Nicholas, whereas Muhammad of Islam was birthed out of the 6th century bishop from Abyssinia, also named Muhammad. Today, I will be introducing you guys to the Abyssinian Muhammad, and I think I can firmly say this is my thesis, and it goes a bit like this. Most of you asked the question, did Muhammad exist? And my answer to this is, in fact, there was an historical Muhammad that the Muhammad of the Islamic traditions narrative was based on. The apparent split between the historical and the traditional Muhammad was caused by the numerous vying political parties and propagandists inventing, fabricating, and suppressing stories and reports to further their own agendas. In this presentation, we'll be going through a few things, definitely touching on the top 3 things to actually introduce this Abyssinian Muhammad. We'll be going through the literary sources, then we'll be going through the epigraphical sources, and then the familial sources. If we do have time, I would definitely like to give you guys what I call the kingly example. Most of you guys may have heard from the Islamic traditions, there was a particular Ethiopian king called the Negus. And to me, this is another legendary figure because we can't quite place who this Negus was in history. And for me, I've actually, I've done the research, and I think I can firmly state who this Negus or this Ethiopian king was based on, and you will find him throughout this presentation. But we will definitely go in, hopefully on a second presentation, we can go in a bit more further and see who this Ethiopian king was. And then, of course, we do the historical versus the traditional demonstration, seeing how, the historical morphed into the traditional or the traditional Islamic narrative understanding, or the standard Islamic narrative, or the dominant Islamic narrative, how those two figures kind of had a split and the traditions were created and became normative. So on my channel, I always like to start off, these types of presentations with a little story of my own. So here it goes. Let me tell you a story of a man in the 6th century who was destined to be a prophet of the Arabian Peninsula. He was a preacher who preached his message throughout Mecca to those who would listen. but gloom and doom was upon him, for he was cast out by his tribe. But fortunately, he was able to convince his followers to emigrate to Abyssinia, where he fostered a wonderful relationship with his Ethiopian king. As he grew in power and status, he was appointed a military leader. He would regularly do dawah to persuade the Arabs to make pilgrimage to the Kaaba. But the people turned against him, which finally led him to make an expedition against them in Mecca. His hope from start to finish was to convert the people to his new religion. And if I was to ask you guys, who was this individual? Of course, resoundingly, you'll all say, of course, Muhammad. And if I was to ask you again, and what was this new religion he brought? I'm sure all of you lot would say, resoundingly again, Islam. But I would say to you, no. In fact, this religion was Christianity. Well, it was a new form of Christianity that was brought into the Arabian Peninsula. I think academics today are just now starting to call this a paleo form of Islam or proto-Islam, but it was very much so Christianity. And now I'm about to introduce you guys to this Muhammad. And this Muhammad, with inside of the Islamic records, if you go to Ibn Ishaq, the Sirah Rasulullah, this has got to be, I think, it has to be a foundational text for anybody who's interested in Islam, for anybody who's interested in the history or historicity of Islam. I think that's a foundational text. And in that text, before you actually hear the story or the narrative of the Muhammad of Islam, which you find on page 104, before you even get to that stage, you have to read up to page 22 and 23, where this particular Muhammad that we have on screen right now, the historical Muhammad, was introduced. And I'll just read it to you guys. It's on the screen in the green highlighted. It says here, with Abraha, there were some Arabs who had come to seek his bounty. Among them, Muhammad ibn Khuzai ibn Khuzaba al-Dakhwani al-Sulami, with a number of his tribesmen, including a brother of his called Kays. While they were with him, a feast of Abraha occurred, and he sent them to the feast. I'm just going to skip a little bit, just to get the bits that actually matter. Then page 23 here, it says here, Abraha replied that he would send them what they liked because his sole purpose in inviting them was to show that he honored them. Then he crowned Muhammad and made him Amir of Mudar and ordered him to go among the people to invite them to pilgrimage at his cathedral, which he had built. Now, I found this passage very, very interesting when I first started learning about Islam, and I started learning about, the history of Islam. And I was like, hold on. So you're telling me before the Muhammad of Islam that we all know about, there was already a Muhammad in the Arabian Peninsula that was preaching a religion, there is Christianity, and was there and was conquering Mecca as well. And this conquering party, the Abyssinians that were conquering Mecca, or had an expedition in Mecca, they also had an elephant called Mahmud. To me, it just sounded very strange that Muhammad of Islam was born in the year of the elephant, i.e. the year of Mahmud the elephant, and was named after the conquering party who came in to conquer Mecca, which was, the leader, which was Muhammad as well. I was like, I don't get it. For me, it stumped me for a while. I thought maybe this could be a foreshadowing. Maybe I didn't really understand it. So I said to myself, let me just dig a bit deeper, because I fully well understood from reading history that there is mentions of individuals who were historical figures. There's a mention of Abraha, who we know was a king of Arabia, a king of Abyssinia. We know that there was another individual called Kays that's also been mentioned, who is Muhammad's brother, who is also, he was a phylak, he was a governor of Palestine. He, ruled the Kinda tribe of Arabs and the Ma'ad tribes of Arabs as well. So I knew all this information. I said, okay, let me just dig a bit deeper to kind of find out more about this particular Muhammad rather than the Muhammad of the traditions. And that has brought me onto a crazy journey and has me presenting this information to you guys today. But in reading this, I said to myself, let's break down this particular passage. And over here, we start to break down this particular passage. It's called the Pericope Analysis in Search of the Historical Muhammad. So over here, as we read, the key passage here says, then he crowned Muhammad and made him Amir of Mudar and ordered him to go among the people to invite them to pilgrimage at his cathedral, which he had built. This is Abraha, the king of Abyssinia, doing these things. So for me, I realized that in reading history, I like to read history diachronically. So, when I was learning these topics, these subjects, I was like, okay, cool. Let me start from the 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century, 6th century, and kind of read up about what was taking place at every single point in the history of Christianity pertaining to that region over there in Arabia. And I was like, hold on, a cathedral, to my knowledge, due to, most of you guys may know about this, but there was something called the Chalcedonian, the Chalcedonian Creed, whatever it passed, the tome, they called it the Tome of Leo, basically. So most of the Christians there, they decided not to follow that tome. And they said, we are anti-Chalcedonians. We don't want to follow that. And Himyarite kingdom, the Ethiopian kingdom, they were part of that. So there was literally no bishops that were given to them during that certain time period. And for me, in order for you to have a cathedral, you must have a bishop. Why? Because a cathedral, unlike every other church within inside of Christianity, a cathedral is very special because a cathedral holds a cathedra. A cathedra is a throne or a chair where a bishop resides. Okay. So it says here that he crowned Muhammad. I looked through the Muslim records, and they said the crowning could either be he was a king, or he was crowned a military leader. But again, those two answers didn't make no sense to me because it all pertained to religion. It all pertained to him going out and doing propagation, doing dawah, and inviting people to a cathedral. So I done some further studies, and I realized that this office that Abraha appointed Muhammad, there was two offices. One was an office of bishop, and the second office, let's just do this one, the bishop. So basically, within inside of the life and works of St. Gregorius, we know that Abraha had a see or a city that was called the city or the Kursi al-Habasha, the see of the Abyssinians or the see of Abyssinia. So he made Muhammad the bishop, or crowned him as the authority, the religious leader of Abyssinia at the time. And then he also made him the governor of Mudar, or in the historical records, it's also known as Ma'ad as well. And I said, okay, cool. All right, this is Islamic records. Can all of this be actually verified? So we find here in Timothy Power, the Red Sea and Byzantium to the Caliphate, AD 500 to 1000, page 70. We see that John Ephesus was writing in 588, and he also records that the seat of Zafar, which was one of the capitals of Abraha during that time period, remained vacant for 22 years upon the death of the bishop, owing to the imposition of the Chalcedonian doctrine on Alexandria, which is to say that the Yemeni Christians were staunchly monophysites. Given the political significance of bishops in the 6th and 7th centuries, the viceroy of Egypt and the governor of Alia at the time of the Muslim conquest were both bishops. One suspects that the church structure described by the sources in fact represents the apparatus of colonial administration set up by Caleb el-Esba. Okay, so we see here that it was quite common for the Abyssinians to set up bishops as actual political leaders. So we see over here, hold on one second. So we see over here where Abraha crowned him as a bishop and also made him a governor. So made him a political leader and a religious leader. And this was something that was common during that time frame. But what's very interesting is it also records that the seat of Zafar, the bishop or the bishophood or the bishopric. I can't remember how to pronounce it properly, but that was left open due to the Chalcedonian doctrine entering into Alexandria, which the Ethiopians were, how can I put it, subordinate to the Alexandrian patriarch itself. But they refused to actually accept a bishop for 22 years, or some say 25 years. And it was very interesting that all of a sudden, there is a cathedral being built, which houses a cathedral, which is a throne for a bishop. And then this particular Muhammad is being crowned as a bishop. I was like, ooh, this is very interesting. Let's see what else we can find. So we see here that also Abraha commissioned him as being an itinerant preacher, telling him to go amongst the people, and also as a pilgrimage propagandist to get people to actually make pilgrimage to his cathedral as well. So let me just give you the historical context. I kind of spoke about it already, but let's just go in a bit deeper. And this is from the Chronicle of Pseudo-Dionysius of Tel Mar. And it says here, he, the king of the Ethiopians, had sent to Alexandria for a bishop and received one from there before the doctrine of the Chalcedonian Synod, and had penetrated those parts. This bishop, after being in this country, briefly paid his debt to nature. Sad times. And the king of the Homerites, or the Himyarites, having learnt that the doctrine of the Chalcedonian Synod had been introduced into Alexandria, and that Theodosius had been expelled on account of his faith and deposed because he recalled from embracing the synod, himself offended by this, refused to accept a bishop from Alexandria. So we can see here that the Himyarites, which is the capital, or where, so you have the Ethiopians, or the Axumites, which is on mainland Africa, Ethiopia. Then you have the Himyarites, or the Abyssinians, which is on mainland South Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula. And, they were known as the Himyarites. They refused to accept any bishops that were coming from the Chalcedonian standpoint. And what's very interesting here is, as it says here, like, what happened, what changed, because we know that there was no bishops in that area, and we see what actually happened. We see that Al-Harith ibn Jabala, he was the king of the Hassanids, and later on we'll kind of discuss something which is very interesting, because he took over from this Abyssinian Muhammad's grandfather. He actually took over from him, and he was the one who was able to bring back Miaphysite or monophysite Christianity into the region. And I will just quote it. I will just read out what it says here. This state of matters excited the religious zeal of Al-Harith ibn Jabala, the king of Ghassan, who came to Constantinople in 542 or 543, and urged Theodora to send 2 or 3 bishops to Syria. Accordingly, 2 were consecrated by Theodosius, the exiled patriarch of Alexandria, namely Theodore as bishop of Busra, with jurisdiction over the provinces of Palestine and Arabia, and Jacob as bishop of Edessa, with jurisdiction over all Syria and Asia. From this time forward, Jacob's life was one of ceaseless toil and hardship. He visited in person and on foot almost every part of his vast diocese, consecrating deacons and priests, strengthening the weak, and bringing back those who had erred from the true faith. But to restore the monophysite church, bishops were necessary, and the consecration of a bishop required the presence of at least 3 others. And then it further talks about, Sergius, his crowning moment, Jacob's crowning moment was when Sergius was, made patriarch of Antioch. Sergius died in 547, and the see remained vacant for 3 years, after which, by the advice of Theodosius, Jacob and his bishops chose Paul, an abbot of Alexandria, to be their patriarch. So we can see that the historical context lets us know that Al-Harith was the change maker to bring back monophysite Christianity into the region of Syria and Arabia. he got in contact with the deposed Theodosius, who was the patriarch of Alexandria, and he got them to consecrate, they say 2 or 3 bishops. The third bishop is never mentioned, and we just wonder who could that third bishop possibly be. But we do know of the bishop Theodore and the bishop Jacob of Bardaeus, but they call him here Jacob as bishop of Adyssia. We see that they went on to try to consecrate and get other bishops and to rebuild the church as well. So over here, we see something written. I believe this was from John of Ephesus, and we find this, the translation of Witold in the pseudo-dionysus of Telmar again. And it says here, when they became wearied by many efforts and failed to receive a bishop who did not adhere to the council, they went so far as to transgress canonical rules and decided that priests should gather and put the gospel upon the head of one of them, and behold, so he was made bishop. In this way, they thought they followed the rules of anointing a bishop, since they did not wait for the acceptance of the lay attendants. Either most of the later became indignant, did not consider this imposition of hands as valid, and did not accept it. On the contrary, a great schism arose among them. So this is talking about the Abyssinians yet again. I should have read from the beginning, basically, kind of tells you here. Thus, they returned empty-handed. But every year, the envoys from these 3 kingdoms came and went for approximately 25 years until priests disappeared and were no longer found among those people. So we can see that something took place within inside of the Himyarite kingdom amongst the Abyssinians, where a bishop was elected, whether it was elected canonically or not. This says that it was not canonically, it didn't take place canonically. But we can see that there was a lack of a bishop for 25 years or 22 years. And then all of a sudden, a bishop was made. So over here, just to finish this off, it says here that the inscriptions of Abraha, dating from about 20 years later, show notably different features. Abraha systematically names the second person of the Trinity, his Messiah. That is the Messiah of Rahman. This second person is no longer called Son or Christos Victor. More generally, the inscriptions of Abraha replaced the Aksumite loanwords by others taken from the Syriac. The terms Messiah, Messiah, church, Beit, and priest, Cassis. These changes probably indicate a new Christology and a change in ecclesiastical organization. At the time of Caleb, the Himyarite church was closely controlled by the church of Aksum, and it skips over. It is therefore likely that under Abraha, the church of Himyar separated itself from the church of Aksum, which answered to the see of Alexandria. The church of Himyar may have turned towards Antioch and Syria. Before the massacre of 523, the Christians of Najran already had close relations with the ecclesiastical authorities of northern Syria, which were generally hostile to the Council of Chalcedon and had Severus of Antioch as their emblematic figure. So we can see here that even on the epigraphic information, so on the steles and monuments, we can see that Abraha broke away from the Aksumite church that was subordinate to Alexandria. Therefore, the Aksumite church under the Alexandrian rule would have been Chalcedonians, but the South Arabians, the Yemenis, the Abyssinians, they were non-Chalcedonian, and we can see quite clearly they lent more over to the Syrian church, and we can see that that Syrian church was still following the lineage of the exiled patriarch Theodosius, and they preserved that. Because of, let me just quickly go back, because of the works of Harith and the queen plus Theodosius, they were able to get these new bishops in and consecrate these bishops. And it is quite clearly that the Abyssinians did exactly the same thing. They would have been in close contact with the Syrians and was able to actually get their own bishop consecrated and be the head of the Abyssinian church as well. And for me, all the evidence points quite clearly that this individual, as recorded with inside of the Syro literature, they call that individual Muhammad. And these records say clearly that there was a change. There was a bishop that was put in place. It's never named, but it is quite clearly that something took place during the rule of Abraham, where the religion of that area changed and something drastic took place during that time frame. So that's the first part. And then let's quickly touch on some of these inscriptions. So let's go into the epigraphical information. Muhammad found in Abyssinia. So over here on the CIH 541 dam inscription, we have something that is very, very interesting, in my opinion. This dam inscription basically is a monument that memorializes and commemorates three key things. It commemorates number one, the where is it? It commemorates the expedition that Abraha did in Arabia and subduing certain Arabs that had revolted, and then it commemorates the consecration of this new church, and then of course the rebuilding of the dam as well. And we can see here that he spent quite a lot of what would be considered money, but resources in terms of slaughtered animals and livestock and drinks, etc., and wine and all manners of stuff, right? Was spent. Everything was spent for these three things here, and you can see it here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right here it has all that information right there. So anyways, over here is the parallel list that I've drawn up. And this parallel list is just showing you where the story of, or the narrative that's told in Ibn Ishaq Sirah on this particular episode in history, he may have drawn upon this particular inscription. Why do I say that? Because we see striking resemblance from his narrative and the dam inscriptions. Why do I say this? Let's go through it. We can see right here there was a summoning of the Arabs. So we're going to go from the Sirah, and then we're going to go to the dam. So summoning of the Arabs, he sent to invite them to the feast, having sent out a summons. There's a festival, one of Abraha's festivals, the celebration of Mass, the ordination, crowned Muhammad and ordered him. There was a consecration of the archpriest. There was a cathedral. Abraham now built the cathedral church of Marib, and then the celebrant with inside of the Sirah literature is called Muhammad. With inside of the dam inscription, which is very interesting, this person is called in Sabaik Qasim Ab, or in Arabic Abu Qasim, which is very, very interesting. And the reason why I find that very interesting is that we know there is several titles, names that have been ascribed to Muhammad whenever you read Muhammad of Islam. Whenever you read the Hadith literatures, you'll find that there is two names that they don't quite know what it means. Okay, there's so much speculation on it. One of them is called Abu Qasim, and the second one is called Ibn Abi Kabsha. And we see over here that, this individual on the Marib Dam was called Abu Qasim. And I just find that very, very interesting to see how an artifact from the original Muhammad also continued over into the Islamic traditions as well. So let me just quickly go forward. And then over here, just explaining the consecration of the church. On my channel, I think I go into a bit more detail to explain everything, but I just want to make it nice and short and sweet for everybody to get things. But over here, just quickly showing you guys that in the year 523, there is an inscription on, I believe it's like a stick. But anyways, I'll continue. It says here, refers to Marib by name and alludes to a local church. And it says here that in March 548, the date provided by X.BSB 74 indicates that this church already existed at the time of Caleb's invasion in 525, implies the presence of a Christian community at Marib. And then we skip over again. It says here, once his church was completed, Caleb, so this is the previous king before, let me continue. Okay. Once complete, Caleb sent messages to Justin and the Archbishop of Alexandria, informing them of his conquest. The Archbishop promptly appointed a bishop for the Himyarites, who, upon arriving at Zafar, consecrated the new church, baptized the locals, and appointed priests and deacons in every place. Skipping down into the green again, Abraha was following a precedent set by Caleb, and in that respect, his reign is marked by certain continuity with the past. Thus, we are told in famous inscription from the dam at Marib, CIH 541, that during his repair of the dam, he marched into the city of Marib and consecrated the church of Marib while a priest was there. Okay, so we can see that, Caleb, what he did in 525, consecrating a church with a bishop that was sent from Alexandria, who was obviously non-Chalcedonian. We see that Abraha did exactly the same thing, went to that same church, consecrated it, and in order to consecrate it, he found a priest which is an archpriest, and that consecration of the archpriest into a bishop, for me, is the turning point. That there is a turning point, that aligns with the Islamic records. So we can see inside of the Islamic records, there is the talk of the same story. We find it in the literary sources, but we also find it as well in the epigraphic sources. And we can see inside of the scholarly community, they can also tell you, yep, this is exactly what took place during the time of Caleb, and Abraha was just basically following the same precedent as well. And what I find very interesting, this is just a quick sidebar. I can't remember why this is here, but a quick sidebar is, if you know anything about the Islamic records, and it talks about Muhammad of Islam now, when he had conquered and he started ruling and so forth, right? He sent out letters to, the various different places or kingdoms. So he sent out letters to the Persians. He sent out letters to the Romans. He sent out letters to the Ethiopian king, the Negus. He did all of these things, okay? Sent out all these letters, and then he had a deputation where he had people from all the different kingdom Arabs come in to see him. But funnily enough, that same story we also find where? We also find on the CIH 541 dam. So I'll just read out to you. It says here, then came to him the plenipotentiary minister of the Negus, and came to him the plenipotentiary minister of the king of the Romans, the ambassador of the king of Persia, the envoy of Mudhiran, the envoy of Haris, son of Jabala, and the envoy of Abikarib, the son of Jabala. The exact same story that took place in the Islamic records for Muhammad of Islam also takes place inside of the Abraha's inscription to do with his Muhammad being crowned as a bishop as well. If you know anything inside of Christianity as well, when bishops are actually enthroned or ordained, other bishops from around surrounding areas actually come and offer gifts and counseling, and come to just show their honor to that individual as well. So it's quite interesting that we see this massive thing taking place, a consecration of the church, and all these individuals coming in from all these different areas. And then we also find the similar thing happening inside of the Islamic records for the Islamic Muhammad. Now, so we've gone through the literary sources, we've gone through the epigraphic sources. Now we're going to go into it's still literary sources, but it's going to be touching on the familial sources. So, the family of Muhammad we're going to be touching on. And I'm not talking about the Muhammad of Islam. I'm talking about the family of the historical Muhammad. Hold tight. So over here in Procopius writes, and it says here, as for the Homerites, it was decided that they should establish Casus, or Case, the fugitive, as captain over the Ma'ad, or the Ma'adini, with the great army of their own people and of the Madani Saracens, make an invasion into the land of the Persians. This Case was by birth of the captain's rank and an exceptionally able warrior, but he had killed one of the relatives of Sumyafa, and was a fugitive in the land which is utterly destitute of human habitation. So each king promising to put this demand into effect, dismiss the ambassador, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so right here, I'm just showing you, guys, that earlier on, we found out that Muhammad, he's a brother of his called Kays, and the rest of his tribesmen went to see Abraham. And we see during the same time period, Procopius is also in 550, I believe it's 550, also writing about this particular Kays as well, which is very interesting to show that this particular Muhammad's brother is also a historical figure. And Sidney Smith actually picks this up in his Events in Arabia in the 6th century AD. And he says here, on one point, the narrative of Ibn Ishaq can be connected with other sources. He states that when Abraham was imposing Christianity on the northern Arabs, he appointed Muhammad ibn Khuzai, Emir of Mudar. And it adds, incidentally, that Kays, who went with his brother to the territory of the Kinana, fled to Abraham. According to Procopius, this Kays, a prince of Ma'ad, had to flee from Sumyafa. Justinian requested that King II restore Kays at the same time that he asked for an invasion of Persian territory. He would renew that request to Abraha, the father of Nunus, twice went to Kays before he became a fugitive in Himyar. That is before 530. Nunus himself went to Kays when he ruled some northern region. He must then have been restored. Later, Kays sent his son Muawiyah to Justinian, then gave his emirate to his brother and followed his son. Justinian made him Phylak of Palestine. The Arab sources show that throughout, Kays was in friendly relations with Abraha. Once Ma'ad was subject to Abraha, it is probable that he would install the former emir, Kays ibn Khuzai, on whom he could rely. It is equally probable that he appointed Muhammad ibn Khuzai to impose Christianity in the Mecca region, since Kays could support him from his adjoining territory. The evidence interlocks, though, from quite unconnected sources. I put this in here because a lot of people, say to me, oh, Cal, who else is saying what you're saying? This just sounds like you're making stuff up, even though I'm quoting sources, but it sounds like you're making it up. Well, cool. You can also go to other individuals such as Sidney Smith, who's writing about the events in Arabia in the 6th century AD, that speaks about this Muhammad, Kays, and Abraha, and imposing Christianity, this new form of Christianity that's spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula as well. So I'm going over here right now to the grandfather of Kays and Muhammad, who's also recorded with inside of historical records as well. And it reads here: read the history of Nonosus, containing a description of his embassy to the Ethiopians, the Amorites, and Saracens, then a most powerful nation, as well as to other Eastern peoples. At this time, Justinian was emperor of the Romans, and Casus, chief of the Saracens. This Kays was the grandson of Arethusa, himself a chief, to whom Nunus's grandfather was sent as ambassador during the reign of Anastasius to conclude a treaty of peace. So, and this is in the Library of Photius. Okay, so as we can see here, we have historical records yet again, or literary sources also mentioning the father of Kays and Muhammad, and this is King Harith of Kinda. And what's going to be very, very interesting again is how it all interconnects quite nicely. So over here, with inside of the same Syria literature again, guess who's also been mentioned? Actually, don't guess yet. Okay, there is a deputation, of Kinda. So the same Kinda tribe is coming in now. All right. And this is very, very interesting. So it says here, they came, Al-Zori told me that he came with 80 riders from Kinda, and they went into the apostle in the mosque. They had combed their locks and blackened their eyes with coal, and they wore striped robes bordered with silk. The apostle asked them if they had accepted Islam, and when they said that they had, he asked why the silk was around their necks, so they tore it off and threw it away. Then Al-Ashath said, "We are the sons of the eater of bitter herbs and so are you. Woo! Like that there, yeah, is so profound that most people won't even catch it, but we will go into it in a little while. The apostle smiled and said to Alabas, said that to Alabas and Rabia, that ancestry was attributed. These two men were merchants, and when they went about among the Arabs and were asked who they were, they would say that they were the sons of the eater of bitter herbs, taking pride in that because Kinder were kings. And he said to them, nay, we are the sons of al-Nadr ibn Kinana. We do not follow our mother's line and disown our father. Al-Shath said, have you finished, O men of Kinder? By God, if I hear a man saying that after today, I will give him 80 strokes. And a quick little, note at the bottom. And it says here, this throws light on Robertson Smith's theory of a primitive matriarchy in ancient Arabia. But what is very, very interesting is what's about to take place next. If you go into the notation over here, it should tell you 896. There's a little notation. So if you turn to the back of the Sirah literature, you will find that notation over here. And it says here, Al-Shath was the son of the eater of bitter herbs on his mother's side. The eaters were Al-Harith, Ibn Amir, Ibn Hujr, Ibn Amir, al-Kindi. Let's just quickly shorten it. This is the same grandfather of our Muhammad, the Abyssinian Muhammad, the Christian bishop Muhammad. Muhammad of Islam, in early Islam, was also being called the son of this particular individual. Very interesting. Let me continue. He was given this name because Amir ibn al-Hubula al-Ghassani raided them when al-Harith was away and plundered and took captives. Among the latter was Unas of, basically the wife of al-Harith. On the way, she said to Amir, methinks I see a black man with blubber lips, like those of a camel eating bitter herbs, who has seized thy neck, meaning al-Harith. So he was called the eater of bitter herbs. Murar are plants, basically. So I find it very interesting, very, very interesting that, as well as being a historical figure, this al-Harith, who is the grandfather of Muhammad and Qais, we also find that inside of Islamic records, Muhammad so too was called the son of this particular eater of bitter herbs, al-Harith. Very, very interesting to me. I don't know if any of you guys find that interesting and what implications that has, but I'll continue. So earlier on, I told you guys about another title that Muhammad holds, which is called Ibn Abi Kabsha. And I presented something like this on Mel's channel because I know Mel, at one time he was almost obsessed with this particular name, Ibn Kabisa, and was doing a lot of work on it. So I thought, let me just sprinkle that in there for Mel. And shouts out to Mel from Islamic Origins, doing great works. Okay, so anyways, it says here, this is by Sean Anthony, and this is to do with Mamar ibn Rashid's The Expeditions. He writes here that Ibn Abi Kabsha, meaning descendant of Abu Kabsha. This was a derisive nickname for Muhammad, the original significance of which is disputed. One explanation asserts that Abu Kabsha was an ancestor of Muhammad from the tribe of Khuzba, who became infamous when he rejected his tribe's idolatrous religion. Thus, Muhammad's enemies called him Ibn Abi Kabsha because he too abandoned his tribe's religion. Let's quickly go on. All right. So right now, we're just going to, further this case of this Ibn Abi Kabsha, and it will make sense in a little while. But let me just read onwards. Qais, or Cases, to whom Nunusus was sent, was chief of two of the most illustrious Saracen tribes, the Kinda and the Ma'ad. Let me just quickly see. Okay. Yeah. All right. Just quickly reading here. It says here, he relates that case after Abramelech had been sent to him a second time, set out to Byzantium, having previously divided his chieftaincy between his brothers, Amir and Yazid. He brought a large number of his subjects with him and was appointed as minister of Palestine by the emperor. So right now we're just filling out, we're filling out more information. So we understand right now that this case had a brother called Amir, and he had another brother called Yazid, according to the Greek records. Okay, Amir and Yazid, and he distributed or divided his chieftaincy between the two. So he gave one the chieftaincy of Ma'ad or Mudar, and he gave the other the chieftaincy of Kinda. Okay, and then he himself went over based upon the emperor's request to Palestine, and he became the administrator of Palestine. What's very interesting yet again is that in the epigraphic records, we find this Yazid being mentioned. So Abraha has written this inscription after revolted and broke his oath. Yazid ibn Kabsha, his governor, whom he had appointed over Kinda, while this tribe had no governor. He rebelled, and with him the princes of Saba, and it continues. So we find out here that this particular Yazid was called the son of Kabsha. Therefore, is it fair to say that the Amir or the Muhammad was also called Muhammad ibn Kabsha? And his brother too, other brother, Qays, was also called Qays ibn Kabsha. And this Abu Kabsha has to be an ancestor of Muhammad, a grandfather of Muhammad. And this grandfather must be a prominent individual for Muhammad and others, Muhammad to be called the son of the father of Kabsha. And we find over here the family tree. We see that we have the three brothers. We see that we have Kabsha and we have al-Harith. And this individual would have been called Abu Kabsha. He is the father of Kabsha. And Muhammad was the Ibn, the son of the father of Kabsha, just like how he was called the son of the eater of bitter herbs, i.e. the grandfather of Muhammad or the ancestor of Muhammad. He was named after, or these individuals took pride in being called the son of a particular individual, a particular ancestor. We are the sons of the eater of bitter herbs. We find out that the eater of bitter herbs was King Harith, and we also find that al-Harith here too had a son called Kabsha, and he was the Abu Kabsha, and Muhammad and the rest of them took pride in being called the son of Abu Kabsha. So this is the curious case of Ibn Abi Kabsha, and this one was pretty much sprinkled just for the good brother Mel. And over here, just to summarize everything that we've spoken about today, is we have all of the sources. So if you want to fact check me and actually go into and read the sources that I've made mention, a lot of them are here to find out about this historical Muhammad. And this is just an introduction into the historical Muhammad, because I really want to go into something which is a bit more profound and show you what was taking place during that time period, and what I call Abraha's Abyssinian Empire of Arabia, where Abraha, within inside of Abyssinia or in Ethiopia, there's two powers really. There's two powers. There is the power of the emperor or the king, and there is the power of the Abuna. So there is that political power, king power, and you have the religious power. And these two powers literally rule the whole of the Aksumite kingdom and the Abyssinian kingdom as well. And over here, Christian Robin, does a map to show you, the length and breadth of Abraha's empire or kingdom. And it's all from all the way, better yet, who does a better job at explaining this? George Hackerty. He does a nice map to show you exactly the extent and breadth of this kingdom that Abraha and his Muhammad ruled over during the early 6th century. Sorry, not the early 6th century, the middle to late 6th century. And he writes here, and this is his actual slide presentation. Give him his credit for that. And he says here, having defeated rebels on the home front and consolidated his hold on Himyar, Abraha spent the 550s restoring Himyar's Arabian empire through a series of military campaigns. In so doing, he curbed the power of Ma'ad, a loose conglomerate of Arab tribes based in Central Asia. At its maximum extent, the empire created by Abraha extended as far north as the borderlands of the Romans and Sassanid empires and stretched from the Hijaz in the west to the Persian Gulf coast in the east, with only Oman remaining on the Sassanid rule. Most of Arabia was ruled by an Ethiopian Christian within a mere 2 decades of Muhammad's supposed, I'm going to add that there, supposed birth. Okay, so we can just see, before there was the Muhammad of Islam, okay, before there was the Muhammad of Islam, that supposedly conquered Arabia, there was a Muhammad of history underneath the King Abraha, who had conquered the whole of the Arabian Peninsula and had spread a new religion, a new form of Christianity throughout the Arabian Peninsula as well. Now I'll leave it there because we could go a little bit further on and talk about some exciting finds that Professor Ahmed Jalad has brought out, in the sense of, we've all heard of the Basmala. I hope we have. This is like the opening line. That's the opening line. If you read any Quran, that's the opening line. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the opening line there. And him, as well as other scholars, have shown that actually traces back to Ethiopia. It traces back to the 6th century underneath Abraham, where this formula was there in the uniting. It was basically created to unite the northern and the southern Arabians under one political hegemony. And, it's basically saying Al-Rahman, which was the South Arabian name for deity, is Allah, or Allah is Al-Rahman, or Rahmanan, the Ethiopian, South Arabian deity. They were one, and it was coming together in as a political unity as well. So, maybe next time, hopefully, if we get a chance, we'll go through all of that. We will go through, a demonstration to show you that the Ethiopian king, the Negus within inside of Islamic records, is actually the King Abraha as well. So that will be very exciting to show you, how much the Islamic traditions relies on, this particular Muhammad and this particular Ethiopian king for their story in creating the stories of Islam and the Islamic Muhammad.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, Kalam. Interesting. I remember reading about this while back, and I didn't buy the idea, but now with the visual, it is difficult to imagine it is dangerous to imagine, actually, not difficult, dangerous to imagine Muhammad was black gentleman. Muslims don't like that idea that very much. But Jay, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah.
Do you think he found real Muhammad?
No, not at all. I think he's misconstrued on 2 things, but we'll get to that. Listen, thank you for what you're doing, Kalam. I think this is great. At least you're looking and you're trying to unpack and you're trying to look at material that is evidence on the ground. That's what we've asked people to do. Look for evidence. Find these. You got that damn inscription. You've got the Procopius. You've gone to this reference. The problem is you're starting out with the wrong premise, and that is you're starting with the Sirah, this book here, page 22 and 23, and then you're trying to read this back into what you see that's happening down in what is today Yemen, that area, what was then called the Hadramat, the Himyarite kingdom, and then, of course, the Abyssinians over on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba over in Africa. So you're bringing Ethiopia and Himyarites and you're reading it into this story, and you're trying to find some black connection because you're black yourself. you're an Ethiopian. You're not Ethiopian, but you're thinking, isn't this interesting that this? You're not saying Muhammad was black. You're saying that his grandfather is black. That's what you're saying.
No,
am I correct?
I'm saying not the Islam. I'm not talking about the Islamic Muhammad. I'm talking about the historical Muhammad, which is a Christian bishop from South Arabia, which is part of the Abyssinian
and he's
kingdom.
black. Yeah, and that to me, I have no difficulty.
He would be
with
most probably black.
Because even Yemen today, there's been a lot of cross-pollination between the Abyssinians and the Himyarites, because they're just they're trading partners, so there would be an awful lot of back and forth. But here's the problem. You didn't show me anywhere where the name of Muhammad, though, from that period. You didn't look and find that word. You're just insinuating that this is Muhammad because the father and the grandfather and the brothers are all the same Muhammad, without even thinking through, hold on a minute, where is this name Muhammad? That's what we're looking for. Where have you found that? Is that name on the dam?
So Muhammad is within inside of the Sabaic. Anytime, yeah. Okay, let me go to that. So the Sabaic writings, again, within inside of South Arabia, does have the the MHMD.
Yes, but that's what you find, but not Muhammad.
But that is, how can I say it? I don't think that is a person. That is a theonym, meaning a name for God. So
no,
the
it's a title. It's a title.
The MHMD, back then, I'm talking about the ones in the Sabaic writings, I think roughly 523. That was the name that they called their deity, their God. So they call their God Rahmanan. They call him, what else do they call him? They call him the Rab, and they've also have a title which is Mahmed or MHMD, and that was a title for the name of their God.
Okay, and that's good. I mean, let's look at that. This 523 inscription, I've got it right here in front of me. I'm looking at it, and it says Rabhad bim Mahmud, which was by the Lord of the Jews, by the Mahmud. So in Sabaic script, that means really by the Lord of the Jews, by the Mahmud, by the praised one, is what it's saying. Now, you could, by the Lord of the Jews, by the praised one, you could put the two together and say, so the Mahmud is the Lord, which would be quite normal in a Christian context, because Mahmud is a reference to Jesus Christ. From St. Ambrose, who starts that whole belief in the 4th century, referring to the Mahmud of Aramaic, which becomes the Mahmud of the Arabic, because we're talking about Arabic now. So that Mahmud would be Jesus Christ. That I can see. But I would be very careful about assuming, therefore, that Mahmud is, and you're not, I hear you're saying that. You're not saying that's the Mahmud of Islam. You're saying that's the proto-Mahmud. That's the, and I would agree with you on that point, that there are almost all the references to Muhammad, as we're hearing everybody say, are not Muhammad, they are Mahmud. And they're all over the place. They're in Jordan, they're in Syria, they're way over in what is today northern Iraq, in Tikrit and Mosul. They're in far to the west as Gaza. Reference after reference to this Mahmud, but many Mahmuds, which is a very common title because many people put that before their names. They call themselves anybody that's anybody that would be a prophet or a warrior, or anybody that claimed to be a prophet would put Mahmud before the praised one, so and so. So that's why you find that both in Christian accounts and you find that in Jewish accounts. The question I need to ask you is, so you find this antecedent there in the 6th century. This, again, just another reference to the praised one, or I'm willing to go with you, it could be a reference to the Lord. Where then and why then do you think this is the original Muhammad? This is nothing more than, again, another reference to a praised one, or in this case, the Lord.
Yeah. So let me see if I can bring this up for you. 1 second.
Well, can you just tell me this rather than going up and bring all these? Because I think you spent a whole hour looking quote after quote after quote. I think you've lost a lot of people. Look at the camera now and just tell us, from your position, from what you're reading, how is it that this is the Muhammad that precedes the Muhammad that Islam then adopts in the Sirah? Because you do know the Sirah are written many, many centuries later and redacted back.
Yes. So, I basically, it's there right now. So I've come to this conclusion by literally, once I read everything to do with the Muhammad of history that I could possibly find, I could see that there are various different parallels between that historical Muhammad and the traditional Muhammad. And I'm just going to just quickly name a few of these right now. So, for example, both of them were called Muhammad. Both of them have had ancestry via Khuzar. Both of them have a title called Abu Qasim. Both of them were said to be apostles. Both of them were said to be associated with prophethood. Both of them were said to have brought a new religion. Both of them received a holy book from God. Both of them carried out religious propaganda supposedly in Mecca. Both of them legislated for the Arabs. Both of them engaged in religious debates, especially with Jews. Both of them persuading Arabs to make Hajj to a Kaaba. Both were associated with erecting and consecrating places of worship. Both have an election narrative as religious officials. Both of them were cast off by their tribes. Both of them made an expedition against Mecca. Both of them emigrated to Ethiopian territory. Both had a close relationship with an Ethiopian king. Both were supposedly religious military leaders. Both were descended from Kindar or Quraysh. Both were reportedly killed on the battlefield. Both were affected by the plague. Both said to have died shortly after the Ethiopian king's death. Continues, right?
Okay. Real quickly,
so
I hear what you're saying, Kalam.
Yep.
2 or 3 points. So what you're just showing is parallels for the man you're saying is the Himyarite, the Kindang is the land of Himyar, which is the land of Yemen today. So we're just talking about the southern part. Both of them you're saying there are so many parallels. Why would that surprise you if the story of Muhammad that is in the Sirah that you started with the very beginning is nothing more than pulling together many different fabrics to create that story? Why would they not go to original earlier stories and use that in the story that they have now? Why would that surprise you?
Yeah, it doesn't. That's the whole point. It's quite clear that they are pulling on the historical Muhammad in order to formulate to formulate the traditional Muhammad. It's quite clear that they're pulling from some place. So they're pulling from historic information. They're pulling from the Quran. They're pulling from a lot of different sources to construct the Muhammad of Islam. But I'm simply saying this is the basis. This is like the ground point of, a historical Muhammad. That is where they're pulling most of the information from.
Okay, and that I think we're on the same page on that. Now, let me ask you this. You did mention in that list that both of them were in Mecca. Where do you get a reference to Mecca in the Himyarite kingdom? From the Himyarite
so
Muhammad?
there is no reference to Mecca personally, and I'll put
But you just said that.
Yeah, I'm saying within inside of the records to do with the Islamic records.
But where in the Himyarite? You're saying the parallel. They both went to Mecca.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Scroll up a bit. I thought you went through that.
Yeah.
You talked about they both went to a Kaaba.
So over here it says that where are we? Suppose they did a military expedition to Mecca. So here we go. Made an expedition.
There you go.
Mecca.
Where do you find that in the Himyarite?
So we don't
for that.
We don't find anything like that. Okay, with inside of anything to do with Himyar, because of course Mecca, and I'm going to put this out as my own personal belief rather than something I can prove definitively. Personally, I don't think that Mecca was a historical place during the 6th century or the 7th century. I think that is what, again, they're doing is pulling from the Quran and exegising the Quran and creating a place called Mecca.
But you've got it there on your graph. Both made an expedition against Mecca. Why do you have it there?
Yeah. Because they're both reportedly to made an expedition against Mecca. So within inside of the Sirah literature,
where does it say Mecca in the Himyarite?
No. It's not in the Himyarite. It's not in the Himyarite. It's within inside of the Sirah literature that they supposedly made a expedition against. Expedition.
Okay, so that's all Mecca. You're saying. The Sirah says that these guys, the Abyssinians made it. Okay, you're not saying that the Himyarite. So that's why you've got the blank on the right. You need to say that.
We have to separate fact from fiction. Okay, what can we historically prove?
Let me just say, when I saw this, I assumed that these parallels you're giving are really from the Sirah. They're not parallels from history.
So some of these are parallels from history, and some of them are parallels from Islamic records. So
you may want to say that to begin with, because I thought you were saying that these are. Look at this has to be look at all the antecedents that are supportive of the Sirah Muhammad, and I thought that's what you were saying. So I see now they're blank there. So there's nothing. There are no parallels for that in all those blank squares, is what you're saying. Okay, now that's fine, and I have no difficulty with this. And I think what you're trying to do is great, because you're trying to put this Muhammad into history. You can go and close that you can close that document off so we can look at each other. Kalam, I think this is important. What you're doing is great, because you are trying to say, are much of what we know in the Sirah, this book here, is using material that probably already took place and is using it to create their Muhammad. Because once you have a prophet, as you see, a prophet was probably created by the, well, if you want to call them the Ishmaelites, the Umayyads. They needed a prophet to have a revelation, and that was probably done after the time of Abd al-Malik, going into the 8th century. Once you do that, you've got to grab, you've got to put, and you've got to create this. You got to give them a story. You got to give your prophet a story. And that's why they were looking and they're grabbing things. And what you're saying, at least I hear you're saying, Kalam, is that they grabbed an awful lot of the story for the Muhammad of Islam from the Abyssinians and from the Himyarite, because there is already an antecedent that is parallel to what we see now. What we now see in the standard Islamic traditions. And you're saying from that graph you just put up, these parallels are numerous. So many of them are numerous. Although I would dispute you, they are not numerous when you start talking about the Kaaba and Mecca and things like that. There's nothing in the Himyarite antecedents that supports that. But they are numerous in that this is a king who had a son, who had a grandson, and had 2 brothers, who also went on pilgrimage, who was went through a crisis after crisis because he was not accepted by his people. And then he finally creates and is accepted because of his prowess, both on the battlefield and in this case, because he received a revelation from God. That I will accept, because once you create that narrative, you're going to have to borrow from some port. And what you're saying is a lot of this is borrowed from down south, from down in the Himyarite and also the Abyssinian. Though most of your references today were from the Himyarite, not from the Abyssinian. That's fascinating.
The Abyssinian, see, this is quite funny actually, because most people think when you're talking about Abyssinia, you're talking about over on mainland Africa. That was never Abyssinia. When you go into the historical records, Abyssinia is actually in South Arabia. And maybe I can do a screen share a little bit later on and show you guys, how, the historical records showing you that South Arabia is a certain region that was classified as Abyssinia. And this is the same thing that, Patricia Crone in her Meccan trade, she goes through it. She's like, hold on, like, you guys keep talking about, the Muslims, or the Muslims were trading with the Ethiopians. There is literally nothing there suggesting that the Arabs or the Muslims knew anything to do with Adulis and the Axumites. There's nothing there in that information. When they're talking about they're going to trade with Abyssinia, they're going down into Yemen to trade. And that region is where Abraha actually reigned, and that was considered to be Abyssinia.
Okay. That makes sense now. Okay, and this is new to me. I do remember, because I've read Meccan trade, but that was almost 20 years ago. But I do remember that makes sense. So really, when we're saying Abyssinia, we're not talking about Ethiopia. We're not talking about Eritrea. We're not talking about Djibouti. That is what most people think Abyssinia is. We're really talking about Southern Arabia. What is Yemen and Oman today? Okay, yes. Well, that sense. All right. I mean, this is now that I think we've clarified and we're saying we find exactly what you're saying. I wouldn't have a difficulty with what you're saying, because, listen, it's obvious that when Islam finally was formed, in contradistinction to the Byzantine Christianity, which was its greatest threat in the 8th century with the Umayyad Caliphate. So listen, you can see that in the coins. You can see this tussle that's going back and forth between Abd al-Malik and Justinian II. You referred to Justinian II. And you can see it in the coins. And lots of it is an internecine. Really, what we're talking about is a anti-Unitarian fight. This is an internecine Christian fight, and you have the Arians, which Abd al-Malik stands for, and you have the Trinitarians, which Justinian II stands for. And this has been going on, listen, since the 2nd century, came to a head in the 4th century with Athanasius in the Council of Nicaea, attacking and confronting and shutting down the Arians. But they brought their head back up again. They raised their heads again in the 7th century. And this time, it's not from an elder in the church. It is from a caliph, a large caliph, who controls from as we now know, he controlled the land from France all the way to India, and from Turkey all the way to Yemen. Now that makes sense. And what you're trying to say, and I like what you're doing, Kalam, you're trying to say, let's go back and see where, when they did finally put the story for this prophet together, where did they borrow a lot of the story from? And that makes sense. You would have to have something that was there to give them the names. That's why it makes sense now that these names that are there are parallel to the names you're finding. As far as the discussion and the fact that there was a lot of confrontation that was gone. That doesn't surprise me. That happened within the church. Has always happened within the church. In this case, it's a position from down in the Hadramaut area, or in this case, you're talking about the Himyarite kingdom, up to what is now the Hijaz area. You did bring up at the very end there that you said that the Himyarite kingdom controlled all of this land. You put those two red spots there. I went up and quickly looked up to see if you were correct on that. And you need to be a little bit more careful. Take a look more specifically what he controlled. Notice he did not control the western part. Almost all of his control was the southern, eastern, and the northern part, which makes sense because that's where the water is. That's where the towns are. That's where the people are. You control where there are people. You control where there is trade. You control where, no water, no food, no people, no towns, no cities, no history, no civilization. You've got to have civilization in order to have trade, in order to control somebody. The only thing that was going up the west coast was on that western plateau, which are just little oases that have aquifers, small, almost incidental. And the largest one, Yathrib, that you have on your map there, it only had 200 people in the 7th century. How do you have a kingdom made out of 200 people? So you can see, even your Himyarite kingdom that you're referring to, be careful. It is really the southern, eastern, and northern. It's where the water is. It's where there is trade, where there are people living. But nonetheless, can you see this really does shut down what a lot of the Muslims are saying? Because the Muslim standard Islamic narrative suggests that everything was happening in the western part. Everything was happening not down in the Himyarite, nor in the northern area. It's all happening in Mecca and Medina. And it's been happening there since the time of Adam and Eve. That's where Abraham rebuilt the Kaaba in 1900 BC, in a place that has no water. You have to scratch your head and say, when they wrote this, did they not look at history? Did they not realize that we are going to be looking at these documents? You've done that today, Kalam. You've done a great job of unpacking and saying, if you're going to borrow and you're going to create a guy in a place that has no history, where are you're going to have to borrow from history? And what you're saying is they came down to us down in the South. And isn't it rather ironic that the people they're borrowing from actually look like me? And they're really the people they wanted to borrow from, the material they borrow from. Even you're probably going to say later, even the God's name that they're using is from my people. The name Allah. That's not quite correct. They listen to Jordan's, the Nabatean Aramaics also use the word ilaha, the same word, but it just meant the God in Arabic. And whether it's Sabaic Arabic or Nabatean Aramaic Arabic, which is from Jordan, Sabaic is the southern part that you're referring to. Allah was the same word. It's just the title for the God, like we do in English, the God. Okay, great stuff. Well done. Keep scratching away. Listen, this is what we say, Kalam. The more we scratch, the more we find. The more we find, the more we shine. The more we shine, the more they whine. Oh, how sublime. We just have to sit back at that history. Really, history do the job for us. Not just history. Look and just see what happened last week. I don't know if Hatun wants to talk about this. Look and see what Yasser Qadi finally admitted about this very man, Muhammad. Look and see what he said a week ago on July 9th, when he got up there in a YouTube interview like what we're doing here, and pretty much said very clearly that, here, I've got it right here. Nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim science of hadith. That's what Muhammad said. It is considered to be completely discredited. From the mouth of probably the best known Muslim, probably cleric today, who has a foot in both camps, in both the Muslim camp and also in the academic camp, to make that kind of statement just a week ago, saying that we don't know really what this man said or what he did. We can only believe that he said and did these things. So since they don't know what he said and did, why don't we fill out that picture for him? God bless you for trying to do that, Kalam. I don't want to go where you have gone. I'm not going to fill out that picture. I'm just going to show that the Muhammad of Islam has absolutely been discredited. And Yasser Qadi has given us the word itself. It's his word, discredited, not mine. If he's discredited, then where did Muhammad come from?
Can I ask a question, Kalam? So did I understand correctly that the Marib Dam CIH, I think it was 541.
541.
So it doesn't mention, it doesn't say Muhammad, it just says MHMD. What is the
No, that one doesn't. That's another inscription that says MHMD.
It's the 523 inscription that says MHMD.
Okay, what is the script in CIH 541?
The celebrant in there is
yeah, what does it say?
Yeah, it's the Qasim Ab. It basically tells you the individual that was consecrated or was in the consecration of the church. Basically, you need a bishop in order to consecrate the church, and that individual was called in there Qasim Ab or Abu Qasim, which basically translates into English as the archpriest. That was the individual.
Okay, so what is the exact script?
Sabaik.
Okay.
That's the name of the script.
Yeah,
script.
Okay. Okay.
Hatun, what do you think? You've listened to both of us.
Well, I do a little bit concern for Kalam's well-being, mainly from the PowerPoints, and then also actually there was a comment I started. So, if Muhammad is black, or comes descended from the black people. So what do we do with the hadith where it says if anyone calls Muhammad black, kill him?
Okay,
so it was pretty wide.
So so there's a difference between the historical Muhammad and the Muhammad of traditions. What I presented today is the historical Muhammad and not the Muhammad of traditions.
So historical Muhammad has nothing to do with the current, let's say 7,000 Bukhari hadith.
The traditional Muhammad, right? You'll find different places that, in terms of description of color, he'll be described as white, reddish, but then you'll also find him described as being brown-skinned as well. So I technically don't even like to touch on it too much because to me, who cares what color these people are? I don't see why. I don't care, but for some people, I understand why you have to care. So I would say that Arabs during that time period, and especially that far down south, technically would have been, you know, I don't know, they would be people of color. They'll be people of color. So in the hadiths, he's described as being brown, and he's been described as being white. It's, you know, pick your choice. What do you want him to be?
So am I right to assume that? So how did we get the just look from the Muslim perspective? So how did they receive the hadith with your real Muhammad version? How do they got this? Like, I don't know, there are like almost 20,000 hadiths. You've got Bukhari, you've got Muslim, you've got all of those 6. So how did we get all these stories?
Most of the stories were created for propaganda purposes. So, for example, you'll have the Shias creating, well, let me do this. The Shias creating propaganda material. You'll have the people underneath the Umayyads creating propaganda information. You'll have other different groups of individuals creating propaganda. And then you'll also have people creating hadiths for the purposes of legal justifications. Then you'll have other people creating hadiths for theological justifications. So this is kind of the way that it was, you know, these stories were invented because they needed to justify certain things. So they will create a hadith to justify whatever they want to actually put forward.
What would you say? So when we look at the church history, we get to see early Christians are opposing Muhammad. Okay, for example, in the writings of John of Damascus, Dr. Jokabi. So wouldn't you think like they would kind of mention that actually he's a bishop, he was a bishop, or anything? They wouldn't even mention anything. They didn't mention anything.
So you have
surprising?
Yes. So you'll have how can I put it? So you'll have the stories that are originating, I would think, John of Damascus. Is that Abbasid or Umayyad kingdom? Who was he on there?
That's Umayyad. That's 730. So we're talking about,
yeah.
This is when he wrote his famous masterpiece. Yeah. So it's late Umayyad.
Yeah. So for him, I think he did acknowledge it being Christian of some sort. I think if it's the right one, he called it.
Let me drop it real quick.
Light.
Let me help you out, Kalam, on this one. Very easy, Hatun. This actually fits with what Kalam is saying. John of Damascus, and this is why he's so good, because he's giving us a window in the 8th century as to what was happening He is right there. Remember who he is. He was right there with Abdul Malik while this was all while Islam was not Islam, while this anti-Trinitarian faction was starting to grow there in Damascus. And remember, this anti-Trinitarian faction were known as Ishmaelites. That's why he writes. Now, there is some concern, and I know Mel has brought this up, that we need to be careful of that word Ishmaelite. It may not be Ishmaelite. It may be another name. I'm not going to unpack that yet today. That's still something we're still looking into. Nonetheless, it's a heresy. This is a heresy of Christianity is what he's writing about. And is a heresy that has to be a heresy of what? In this case, as John Damascus, he was a strong Trinitarian Christian. It's a heresy against the Trinitarian Christianity.
But he's not identifying Muhammad as who was once upon a time bishop, right?
No, he doesn't say. He calls him a monk. He calls calls him a prophet. He is known as a prophet. And he gives the name prophet there, but he gets his material from an Arian monk. Arian monk means an anti-Trinitarian monk. So that's probably where the old anti-Trinitarian Arian view, what then later became Islam. That's why Islam is so anti-Trinitarian, why it's Arian in nature, because of this first prophet named as Mahmet. Notice he calls him Mahmet, and he writes it in Greek, so we know how it's actually written out. We know how it's actually pronounced. And then he talks about this evil prophet, this evil man, Mahmet, and who has these terrible things against women. Again, and then he talks about 4 books.
Yeah, so the way I'm thinking is John of Damascus, Doctrina Jacobi, I can't pronounce that, but anyway, so because they are not identifying Muhammad as bishop or anything, if he was bishop, they would say so. Therefore, I'm thinking their silence speaks volume. But
yeah, be careful with. I mean, you're kind of confuting to a number of things. If you're looking at the Doctrina Jacobi, that's not there. It's just talking about this guy that comes with the sword. It doesn't use the word Muhammad. That's not even.
They're not mentioning that leader as bishop at all.
No, that's because these.
Can I just quickly say, I
basically think guys who are actually using the sword and they're warriors, and they would later on they would probably use the nomenclature, the praised one, because anybody that's a warrior that would if they're a warrior, in order to get authority, they would call themselves a prophet, and they would probably use the word Mahmet as the nomenclature to give them authority. Yeah, go ahead, Kalam.
Yeah, I wanted to say because Sean Anthony actually brings it up. He argues against this point, but he brings it up. Let me just share my screen real quickly. In terms of, and I think this is quite interesting. It says here, in the context of Doctrine of Jacobi, and it's unabashedly pro-Christian propaganda, the Keys to Paradise motive evokes Christian conceptions of apostolic authority. In late antique literature, possessing the keys to the kingdom of heaven is attached to the clerical leaders of the church and their stewardship of the authority conferred by Christ on his disciples. The 4th century Syriac-speaking aesthetic Afarat refers to Christian bishops as keepers of the keys. So we can see that, technically speaking, the Doctrine of Jacobi does, kind of substantiate my stance that, although he's talking about the traditional Muhammad, that he's saying that these individuals, this Muhammad says that he was the keeper of the keys, meaning that he has apostolic, he has an apostolic mission. Basically, he's also an apostle, meaning he's also a bishop, because the bishops were called the keepers of the keys. So, it does tie in there as well.
Yeah. Keys of Paradise. That's actually from Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. And interesting, it refers to the Saracen prophet with a sword who has the keys to paradise. Exactly what Kalam is saying. That suggests anybody who was claiming authority as a prophet, as all men who were with swords did at that time. That's nothing new. Nothing in that Doctrina Jacobi that speaks about anybody called Muhammad.
Okay.
Also, it's written in Aramaic, and I don't recall Muhammad ever speaking Aramaic, so that's another problem.
He can be magical guy. Let me bring up a couple of comments before we finish. So what is your interpretation of the hadiths where it states like, oh, Muhammad couldn't read and write?
That's nonsense. I think that
if he was probably he was able to read and write.
I think there is definitely, it's nonsense. Again, it's the Muslim tafsir writers trying to understand certain words in the Quran that they themselves did not understand. So they came across a term called ummi or ummiyun, and for them that meant illiterate, but it simply meant somebody who is not a person of the book, a Gentile prophet, unscriptured. Unscriptured. So this was, a lot of the apostles or the bishops in Syria were also called the same thing. Basically, they were this is stemming back to Paul, to be honest with you. It's the apostle or the prophet to the Gentiles. That's what the term really meant. But they saw that, they didn't understand it, and they created a whole narrative around it to try to explain it. But if anybody reads the Quran without the lens of Islam and the Islamic traditions and just read it as a piece of literature, you would quite clearly understand that this individual knew the Bible, knew other books, what do we call it now? Apocryphic books as well, outside of the Bible. And he was writing, like having a dialogue or conversation with these works. So it's quite clear that this individual was a very well-read individual. So it's impossible for this person to be illiterate, in my opinion. It's impossible.
This comes in chapter 7 of the Quran, verse 157, who believes Allah and gives up the messenger, the prophet who can neither read nor write. Now, how do you unpack that? That's why the traditions try to say that this man, if this man could not read or write, Muhammad could not read or write, how then did he create? Was he able to create such a great piece of literature as the Quran? So it became a later polemic, probably introduced after the 11th century, but not certainly before that.
Yeah, also helpful to remember Bukhari 114 states, bring me writing materials, I can write you statement after which you won't go astray. We've got that contradiction there as well. What about this one? Muhammad's family, Sahih Bukhari, volume 5, book 58 to 136. Allah's prophet, peace, police, FBI, and child protection be upon him, married Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated their marriage when she was 9 years old. So I don't see a comment in here, but question here, but yeah, Aisha was 6 years old child.
Okay, I think the question is, are we going to have to throw that out? And yes, absolutely. There was no Muhammad who was married to Aisha from 9 years old, which shuts down many of your arguments. But nonetheless, you still got to use it because that's the Muhammad they believe. That's
right.
That's why don't stop bringing that up.
It clearly Titans TV wants to throw it out. Jay Smith wants to throw it out. We want Muslims to throw it out. We want Muslims to throw it out because it is very dangerous to people.
Dangerous ideology.
Was introduced, the only Sahih Bukhari, volume 25, that we have in canonical form is from the 14th and 15th century. That's 700 years too late.
Yeah. And I just want to say this, that, this is my problem with reading the Quran from Islamic perspective. I don't believe that the Quran is an Islamic book. Now it has become, has been co-opted to become an Islamic book, but I always wonder why are we not reading the Quran from a historical standpoint? What I mean by this is the very first Quran manuscripts that we do find, or fragments that we do find, is the Sana manuscript, and that's dating back to the 6th century. That's dating back.
Be careful.
Sana.
Where do you get the date for the Sana manuscript as 6th century?
So the Sana manuscript is between the 6th to the 7th century. So
705 is the copy we have today. That's 8th century.
You are talking about the palimpsest, right?
The palimpsest. Sorry, the palimpsest. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
The palimpsest is 790 to 690 to 690. That's not the 6th century. That's the late 7th century.
I've got it. I could be. No, I don't think I'm wrong though. Let me just quickly.
I think you're talking about the Birmingham folios, not the Sana manuscript. You're looking at the Birmingham folios.
Let's see. Yep, you could be right.
The Birmingham folios, two folios are.
I hate when you say
18, 19, and 20. The first one, chapter 18, is actually the 2nd century. That's 146 AD.
So.
And the second one, chapter 19, the reference in chapter 19 comes from the Methodius, the Procopia Methodius, which comes from 500 AD. That is the 6th century. That's chapter 19. And then chapter 20, which is the story of Moses, comes from the Old Testament, which is 1400 BC.
So
but the
Birmingham,
manuscripts itself, the earliest manuscripts we have for the man in Ephesus, the man who lived in Ephesus with the dog, that is from 146 BC.
no, he's talking about great son. No, you are talking about Sana manuscripts.
So you are
carbon datings of Sana manuscripts.
Okay. You're talking about carbon dating now. Be careful with that, Kalam. The carbon datings were sent to four different studios in Europe. One was in Switzerland, one was in Lyons in France, one was in Oxford in London, Britain, and the other one was in Germany, Kiel in Germany. And they did a carbon dating of one fragment, and they came up with dates that range from the 4th century all the way up to 500 AD, up until the 6th century. That's carbon dating. Okay, be careful of that. Carbon dating only tells you the date of the manuscript itself. It doesn't
animal died.
It tell you when it was written. But do you notice right there, that shows just how inexact carbon dating is. The fact that it ranges from 390 up until 500, that's almost 130 years, 110 years different of range that it could be. So that's so inexact as well. But that doesn't tell you anything about when the Sana manuscript was actually written.
Yeah, because I always thought to myself, like, in a sense that we see that these manuscripts are pre-Islamic. Well, I thought they were pre-Islamic before,
The stories are pre-Islamic.
Definitely, because most of these stories originated in the 6th century in Syria, especially to do with, I think it's the sleepers of Ephesus.
That's the one. That's chapter 18. That's the Birmingham folio that we're referring to. The sleepers of Ephesus comes from 146 AD. That's the 2nd century.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, cool. And then we're finding these things within inside of the Great Mosque of Sana, that was, originally the capital of Abraha's city, that was converted into a mosque. It was his church that was converted into a mosque. I'm like, why don't we think that it could have originated during that time period rather than the 7th century?
Because they are that manuscript that you're referring to is the A328 is only 328A is known as that. DAM A 328A is only about 23% of the Quran, and those have been dated. They have been dated to around 705, early 8th century, except for the palimpsest, which is the lower layer, that has been dated to the late 7th century. Okay,
because I just see them as Christian literature that's been co-opted by Muslims to create their Quran.
Oh yes, I mean that. I think most scholars are coming to that conclusion, and we're doing actually a whole work on that, Kalam. Here we have a whole series. In fact, we have 3 great scholars right now who are putting together all of the material in the Quran and looking for the antecedents for everything in the Quran. And it's just going to be about another year when we'll be able to start publishing it, showing where almost everything in the Quran came from, what place it came from, who was the author, and what date we're referring to. This is going to be hard for Muslims to stomach because much of the Quran is borrowed from those sources, and a lot of it's borrowed from Christian sectarian writings, from Jewish apocryphal writings, from Ethiopic writings. There's that's the other part of Abyssinia, Ethiopic writings. The Orthodox Church in Ethiopia, that's in the world today, and also from Zoroastrian writings, and we've now found some material that even comes from Chinese writings. So great stuff, but hold on, that'll be another year before we get that published.
Just a quick question. Where are any historical books or records of Yemen being Abbasinido?
Okay, let me do this.
Thank you very much for your generosity, Drew.
Can you see, which one can you see?
Okay, I can see it now.
You can see it, right?
An Arabian people living next to. Is that what you want me to see?
Yeah, there you go. So
next door could also be Ethiopia.
Yeah. So an Arabian people living next to the Sabians, together with the Hadramites, the region of the Abyssinia produces myrrh, incense, and cotton, and they cultivate a plant which yields a purple dye. It lies on a route which leads from Zabid on the coastal plain to the Himyarite capital Zafar. For that reason, Hermann von Wissmann located Abyssinia, the fertile and rainy mountains region of Jibal Hubaysh to the northwest of present-day Ib. There are, of course, other place names in western and southern Western Yemen, formed from the nominal root Habesh, which could likewise be compared Then it continues, but it's for some reason it's not.
What is?
Sorry.
Which book is this from?
This is from. I'll have to pull it up. I'll put it up afterwards. I'll put it up afterwards because I'm just literally reading my posts.
That's fine. That's fine.
But I believe it is the Encyclopedia of Ethiopia, something like that. I think it's Encyclopedia of Ethiopia.
Okay.
But let me just quickly bring up the finishing bit I just found. Hold on.
Kalam, are you suggesting that none of Ethiopia or Eritrea was ever called Abyssinia?
None of Ethiopia or Eritrea.
In the eastern part of Africa was ever called
I'm thinking
Abyssinia.
In the 6th century. I do not think so. Not within the 6th century, no.
Prior to that?
Prior to that was called... Sorry, repeat the question.
The eastern part of Arabia, where we find Eritrea and Ethiopia and Djibouti today, that whole area of the western side of the Red Sea, are you saying that was never called Abyssinia historically?
Definitely not, to my knowledge, not before this, not before the 7th century. No, I couldn't find anything for that.
Okay.
Yeah. And this kind of finishes off that bit. It says here, around Jebel Hubaysh, in the western part of the Hugairia, to the southwest of present-day Taiz, it can be assumed that Habesha, who immigrated from South Arabia into northeastern Africa, are the Abyssini of Uranius, who settled either in the region of Jebel Hubaysh or in the surroundings of Jebel Habashi in southwestern Yemen, the inhabitants of which are called Ahabish up to now. So when we're talking about Habesha or Habashi or Abyssinia during that time period, we're talking about a place within inside of southwestern Arabia. Okay, so to me, these people, although they have African features, I would call them South Arabian Abyssinians. Like, they're actually South Arabian. They may be black because obviously they have migrated from mainland Ethiopia, but that kingdom was that were called Abyssinians was South Arabians.
Okay, so Kalam, thank you very much. There are lots of things to check, go through the references and look at it. And Jay, thank you very much for coming in and joining the conversation. So what will I do is I will keep eye on the comments of this live stream, and then depend on the comments link with the topic which we discussed. I'll ask you to come back again to I don't know, bring clarity or answer the questions that people will put up in the comments. Would you be okay with that?
Definitely. I will be in the comment section. So if you have any comments, sorry,
don't harass it.
No, of course not. So if you have any comments, questions for me on pertaining to the presentation, like, please ask away. I'll be happy to answer any of those questions. When it comes to, I don't really care for the complexion or the color of Muhammad of Islam. So if it's anything to do with that, please, like, whatever color you want him to be, that's down to you. I don't really care. Those people in the comment section.
It does seem the traditions had a problem with his color, and they tried to make him as white as possible. I think that's what's going on here, is because possibly, if you are correct, Kalam, then it looks like they took a story and people were saying, hold on a minute, the story of his father and his grandfather come from Abyssinia. Those people were black, so therefore he must have been black. And so this is a way to shut that down. I think that's what's going on here. There was probably a confrontation. Is not interesting, because when Sarah Lumger, when she did her whole history of slavery and showed that the vast majority of slaves, way outnumbering the slaves that went through the Americas, went to the Arab world. There was almost 20 million slaves that the Arabs took up to the Middle East, And it's fascinating, when they would sell them in the marketplace, they were the ones that started delineating the different colors. And the lighter the skin, the more expensive. The darker the skin, the least expensive. It's the Arabs who created this whole problem with coloration.
That will be another live stream.
This is something that's absolutely introduced by Muslims. There is none of this coloration prior to this. It's coming out of Islam. And when she brought that forward, that was hugely, well, as you can see, the Muslims really rejected, and boy, did she get an awful lot of kickback on that.
And you know what? Actually, you know what? I like to antagonize people. Let me antagonize. Can I antagonize for 1 second?
1 second is fine. More than 1 second will be dangerous.
All my racist Muslims, yeah. Let me just antagonize you for 1 second, real quickly. So this is quite interesting. This is from Al Jahiz, right? And this is it's funny. It says here, they said, Abdul Muttalib fathered 10 lords, black as the night and magnificent. Amir ibn Tufail saw them circling the Kaaba as if they were handsome jinn. And he said, with these present, the gatekeeper of the Kaaba is useless. Abdullah ibn Abbas, so this is the Abbasids now, right, was blackest in magnificence. And the family of Abu Talib were the most noble of men. And they were black with black skin. So this is from, one of your scholars, Muslims. This is from Al Jahiz. And he writes about the glory of the black race. And in there, he's been asked by the caliph's second in charge, the second in power. He's asked to basically write about the glory of those black people. And he talks about Muhammad's grandfather and others being black people. So very interesting.
We're going to get a lot of reaction on this one.
So very interesting stuff. And that's just a trigger of my racist Muslims.
Also remember one of the reasons that Muhammad wanted to divorce Sauda was because of her color and her getting bigger and bigger. Okay, so we will hopefully pick up another live stream and then deal with the comments are put forward or questions are put forward in the comment.
Before we go, can Kalam just give us a quick overview of everything you
I was gonna say
in just bullet points?
Yeah, in a few minutes, if you summarize for those of us who is lazy to watch all 1 hour 47 minutes video.
Okay, so a quick summary is this, that to answer the question, did a Muhammad exist or did Muhammad exist? It's a tricky question because it's not so simple. Yes, there was a historical Muhammad that existed, but this Muhammad existed within inside of the 6th century, and he was a Christian bishop from Abyssinia. That the stories, the traditions, the seerah, the hadiths, the tarikh, everything that you know about Islam, in terms of information pulling from history, is based upon the historical Muhammad. But the historical Muhammad and the traditional Muhammad, there is a massive split where the two definitely are not the same. Just like Santa Claus and Saint Nicholas today aren't the same people. One is legendary and one is historical. Same with Muhammad. There is a historical Muhammad of the 6th century who was a Christian, not a Muslim. And then there is the legendary figure, Muhammad of Islam, of the Islamic traditions, who was a Muslim, who there is literally nothing historical about that Muhammad. There is nothing that we can tie him to a place called Mecca. There is nothing to tie him to even to a tribe called Quraysh. That Qurayshi tribe never existed neither. Okay, so there's so much things that if you start to learn and read, please, I'm just hoping if you get anything out of this, please start to read academic books on Islamic studies and Quranic studies, and you realize that the most of the things that you think you know about Islam and Muhammad is completely made up nonsense.
And we end with this quote from Yasser Qadi. Nobody in the academia affirms the Muslim science of hadith. It is considered, everything we know about Muhammad academically, to be completely discredited.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kalam, for willing to come in and then make your case. And thank you very much, Jay, for jumping in for the conversation. And thank you very much, everyone who joined us in the chat. Hope to see you again. God bless you all.
Peace. And last thing, don't forget to like and donate to Hatun, please.
Like, comment, subscribe, all these things.